I have an idea.
Mm-hmm. Oh, have you?
I I do have an idea. I got some really cool audio software that I found from a long time ago. So my idea is that I'll record a bunch of different voices and I can add effects to them, and then we'll put them on the website, and then people can log in and they can buy them.
Why would people want to buy these multiple versions of your voice?
Well, first of all, you won't know it's my voice because you can make it sound like anything you want. So they can actually just buy my voice, and I can do all kinds of different stuff for people.
Yeah, but, well, what specifically would they use that for?
I don't know. It's, you know me, I'm an entrepreneur. I always look for different ways in which I can do things. But I thought, wow, I mean, people ask me to do voice stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
So I'm like, all right. So why wouldn't I could do like a really super low one. Or I could add it, like make it sound like a cartoon character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of one of those things. Maybe I should leave it to the professionals. Do you think so?
Yeah, I would say so.
And that brings us to who we're going to have on today. We have got an awesome guest for you today. JD Sutter is going to be on with us. We're going to talk a little bit about podcasting and all kinds of stuff, so stick around. Hey everyone, I am Skip Ranke.
And Nate Kufal.
And this is the Main Street Marketing Podcast.
A podcast where we discuss anything and everything marketing.
And today our guest is JD Sutter. He is a new media consultant, audio drama critic, and owner, station manager, and program director of the internet radio station PorchlightFM. Thanks for joining us today, JD. We're happy to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
So, Nate, what do you say?
Well, first thing I want you to do, JD, is just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into podcasting. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's a long story, but I basically got into it because I found out about the medium of podcasting many years ago, and I just fell in love with the idea of anyone being able to share a message with the world and get it out there. And I looked into it a little bit more, and I thought, wow, this is something that I think I'd really like to do. I'd always been enamored with radio, even as a kid. I was one of those pesky teens who would call the DJs all the time at the radio station and chat with them and talk about songs and request music and all that kind of stuff. And so this was like, well, this is a great opportunity for me to get into that world a little bit. And so I started back in 2007, and it's grown from there. Now I've been working with other people. And so I'm primarily these days a voiceover artist and audio producer. And I work with individuals and companies to help them create content around their business through various media or online outlets, and so I can come alongside them as a producer, an editor, a voice talent, or a coach as they're developing a show. And then I also create my own content as well. And it's just been an interesting journey over these several years now. And at the root of it all, I like to just think that I'm a storyteller, and I'm just using these various different mediums to tell stories.
So, Skip, I know you referred to Porchlight FM. It's Porchlight Family Media, right?
That's the company name, yeah.
Right. So tell us a little bit about Porchlight Family Media. What is Porchlight Family Media?
So when I first got started in podcasting, I was just working, creating content in a particular area, and it started to take off, and I really enjoyed it. And I realized, well, I'm also interested in this thing over here too. And so maybe we could do some content around that. And so it just grew. And so I realized, well, I need to have some sort of an umbrella to put all of this content under. And so we created Porchlight Family Media. The content is all, it may not be for all ages all the time, but it is all going to be family centered. It's going to be clean content, so you listen to it while the kids are around. You don't have to worry about what they might hear. And so we have content related to audio drama, to books, to music, and then we have the online radio station, which is a 24/7 stream of Christian music. And so we have all of this content underneath that umbrella of Porchlight Family Media. And so all of the projects that I work on and work with other voice talent and composers and things like that, all of that content is under that umbrella.
I know you have in your profile you're a new media consultant. I never really heard that term before. Could you explain what that is exactly?
Thank you for asking that, because I was just going to follow up and ask that question.
Well, new media is, you're talking about podcasting and social media and blogging. And so the landscape, of course, has changed a lot since I started. But what I do is, like I said, I come alongside these businesses and organizations and even individual entrepreneurs who have some sort of product or service, and just coach them through the process of starting up a blog. I used to do websites too, but I've stepped away from that. Um, haven't done that really all that much in the last several years, but it's more focused on the content, more dynamic web pages and blogs and podcasting, and with a real big focus on the audio stuff lately. And so, yeah, it's just been an interesting journey of working with people. I've worked with CEOs and comedians and radio personalities and all kinds of different people. It's been a blast.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so with the recent podcasting boom that's been going on, I mean, how can a small business start utilizing a podcast? I mean, what can they do to have that and use that as part of in their marketing strategy to help them with their business?
Yeah, so it really depends on what sort of business you're in, of course, and what kind of information would your customers benefit from. Are you in an industry where frequent updates on product or service offerings are something that would be very valuable to your customer, your existing customers or potential customers? If you're working in a rapidly moving market, or there's industry conditions that are constantly changing, maybe you can do just a news update podcast. Maybe it's every morning you do a short 5-minute update that goes out to your mailing list, or even a weekly thing or something along those lines. Even a local store that's offering location-specific products, you can benefit from this media outlet. Perhaps a weekly or monthly guide for using or maintaining your product, whatever that might be. I mean, even a pet store, they could put out a show where they talk about the different pets that they have and how to care for how to care for this bearded dragon, lizard, or whatever it might be, and cater to the needs of your existing business audience. And most places have a Facebook page or something where they have feedback and interaction with their customer base, and so they can learn what it is that people are wanting to know, and use that as a basis to build out their content set on their show.
And I hear so many people all the time when we talk, and when we're having conversations with people, they say, "Well, I couldn't do a podcast. I don't have anything to say." But it's interesting you say that, because everybody's got something to say about something that they do.
Yeah, and there's so many podcasts out there right now. I mean, it seems like there's a podcast for almost anything you could think of, or if there's not, you can make one. But specifically for businesses, how do they decide if podcasting is a good marketing channel for them?
Well, I'm actually working with a client right now. I can't really divulge too much. The show hasn't launched yet, but we're in the early stages. And what they're focusing on is they're taking a human interest approach to the content. So they're talking with their customers and telling their stories of how their service has impacted and affected their lives in a positive way. And so they're taking those stories and turning it into a really interesting narrative style podcast. And so there's all different ways you can do this. So knowing what your potential customer needs and wants is very important. And then having a personality to host the show that is engaging, has something of a magnetic personality. That's very important. It doesn't mean you have to be a professional broadcaster, of course, but you need to have somebody who can get the message across in an entertaining and informative way, and doesn't get in the way of the information that they're trying to get across. If you're wanting to look into this, you need to talk to a coach. And I'm not saying that just because I do that, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. There are people trying to sell courses and get you into started podcasting, and you don't need to do a lot of that stuff. It just takes a little bit of a learning curve, a little bit of tech and just a basic gear sometimes. And it's just not super complicated, but just get some good information, do a little research, and then see if it's right for your business.
See, I think that answered one of the questions that I have is when a business owner, when they want to actually start doing something for a podcast, is where do they start and how do they start? And I think sometimes there is so much information out there that makes it look like it's such a majorly daunting thing. Like they have to, it's so complicated to get it going. It really isn't that hard. It's a little bit of information, like you say, a little bit of learning, really a little bit of equipment. It's not like you need a whole, I think sometimes people think that they have to have these elaborate sets and they have to just have all this thing like they see on, and it doesn't have to be that. It could be something very, very simple. And, that's almost the kiss, keep it simple. Because it's the message that you want to get across, not what they look at behind. And we have one because that's just what we did. But not everybody has to do that.
Yeah, and I think people get hung up in how just where do they start? How do you structure a podcast?
Well, it goes back to knowing what your customer base needs. And the show format could really be anything, but it should suit the content and the presentation style of the host. So I think one of the best ways to start exploring it is look at your FAQ that you have for your business and start drawing ideas from that. These are things that your audience, your community, your customer base is wanting to know, and that is a really great place to start looking for episode topics. And you know what? You don't have to commit to an ongoing show that lasts for years. Sit down, map out 5 episodes, go through the entire process, create those, and maybe even just do a test run inside your company first, just see what people are thinking, and then start putting them out there, see what kind of response you're getting, and then go from there and make a decision based on that. Now, I would say, even if you don't get like a huge amount of traction right at the beginning, it might take a little bit more time for it to start to get out there, because as I'm sure you guys know, dealing with social media, you're dealing with a lot of noise out there. So you do have to be a little bit patient. But I think that's another thing that people get hung up on. They think, well, I have to commit to this thing and do it for the rest of my life or whatever it might be. Just do a test run. 5 episodes is a great place to get started and just see if it's something that you can fit into your marketing schedule.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because when you talk about, how to come up with your topics, I really like that suggestion about looking at your FAQs. That's a really good suggestion, and I never really thought about that until you said it. I'm like, oh, of course, if people that are asking you those questions, that's what you should be addressing. That adds, but then that's just going to add value.
Exactly.
So, what are some of the most common mistakes that you do see people make when they're starting a podcast?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones that I see is just bad audio. As I said a moment ago, it doesn't take a whole lot to get into it, but you do have to do a little bit of research to make sure you're not just putting out something that just sounds awful. Because the whole point is you want to make something that's informative or entertaining, but you don't want it to come across as a constant advertisement for your business either. So it has to be adding value to their life, to whatever it is that your product or service helps them with. But there are subtle ways you can tie in your product or your service to the content. And so one of the things that happens is the bad audio gets in the way of the message. And so making sure the audio is clean is very important. Really bad cover art sometimes. I see that a lot. So make sure you have a good graphic designer on board to handle that. And the other thing is, you don't have to publish everything you record just because you took the time. I mean, yeah, you might have wasted an hour on that and it didn't come out the way you wanted. But yes, consistency is important, but the quality of the content is far more important than putting something out that's subpar, because that's a reflection on your brand. So that is a big thing. And make sure that you edit. Don't waste the listener's time. So I'm a big proponent of carefully curating the experience. So you're taking the listener on a journey, even if it's only a 5-minute show. You are presenting this content in a way that's engaging, and you don't waste their time, because there's a lot of other stuff out there that they could be doing. But that is one thing that's nice about an audio podcast, is they can do that, or they can listen to that while they're doing something else. But you still want to make it worth their time. So editing, don't leave in those flubs and all those mistakes and stuff like that. I hear people do that all the time. I've even heard podcasters say, oh, we'll cut that out in the edit or whatever. And I'm like, obviously you didn't. I'm listening to it right now. So they think it's charming. It's adding to the personality of it. No, don't waste the listener's time.
Right. And so that brings up another thing, something that you've talked about. How do you balance, because businesses, if they're starting a podcast, part of what they're doing is they want to market either their product or their service, but they also want to create something that's going to have value, like you say. How do you balance the two where you want to market what you're doing, but what's the artistic side to all of that? What's the piece that they might be missing in that balance?
Yeah, that can be tough for certain industries. But I think even in what might be considered mundane, information-based content, there still needs to be a story arc to the way the content is presented, and there, it does take some planning and forethought. That's another thing. Don't just wing it. Don't just sit down behind the mic and just start recording. Think about this ahead of time. Plan it out. Every single episode that I record, I have a Google Doc that runs down. And now I don't script out every single word, but I have a very detailed outline, and I know where I'm going. There are beats that I'm running through as I'm recording a show, and so you want it to be engaging. Again, it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and end. There's a progression, orderly, and not jumbled up and thrown together. So, it's hard to get into specifics without knowing a specific industry, and so that's where somebody like me can come alongside somebody and help them flesh out how to implement this with their specific vertical. But yeah, it definitely takes some forethought and planning, and it can be done. It definitely can be done. I've worked with so many different people over the years, and various different industries, and it's possible.
I will say that when we first started our podcast, it wasn't properly planned out the way it should have been, like you talk about, and it showed. I mean, the first couple I'd recorded, I was just like, ugh. When you go back and you listen to it, you're like, wow, that was not good. So let's just not even put that one out there, and but then we really came in with a different approach. And
but you do get better over time.
Oh yeah,
that's
exactly.
Part of it. You learn how it works. You kind of fall into figuring out what your show structure is, kind of by doing it.
Yeah, that's good. And so let's say a business starts their podcast and they start rolling with it, and they're getting it going. I mean, what kind of metrics would they look to show the success, or I would say the success, but how the impact of the podcast that it's having? What are some of those metrics that they would look at?
Well, first of all, you want to use a dedicated podcast media host. There are companies out there that are designed specifically for hosting audio and video files for podcasting distribution. And so they can help you. They track all of the stats for you. And so I also tell people, don't pay too much attention to the actual number of downloads / listens. Different platforms call it different things. But just look at the trajectory. Look at where things are going. If it's heading up, then okay, cool. So you want to look at that metric, and then you also just want to interact with your target audience, your community. See how the content is impacting the customer base, and that's more important than gaining a huge following. If you started that, for instance, that daily info update for your audience, and you're hearing from them, this is super helpful, that information helped me with this particular problem, that's what you want to pay attention to, and make sure you're doing more of that. So yes, look at the number, see where it's heading. Certain platforms can also let you know where people are dropping off of the content. And so, if you get halfway through and everybody's dropping off, you're like, well, that's that segment that I'm doing right there. Nobody's interested in that. So don't necessarily look at the precise number, but just look at the trends. And then also, again, how is the content being received by your target audience?
We talk about looking at the metrics all the time, and that's really. You talk about something with regards to time, and I get asked this question. I'm going to ask your opinion on it. Everyone says, how long should a podcast be? And it's a standard question that I always get, and my answer is always long enough to convey your message that people need to hear,
and not a minute longer.
Yeah,
as long as it needs to be. That's the answer. It should be as long as it needs to be. There's no set time. Used to, people would say, shoot for the average time of a commute, which was about 20-25 minutes. But commutes have really gone away a lot in America, especially after COVID, when a lot of people were working remotely. That's not really something that you have to pay attention to anymore. Now, I will say shows that are trending shorter seem to do better these days, depending on the topic, because there is just so much content out there. If you drop a 3-hour show, it's going to be harder to find an audience for that.
So what are some emerging audio trends that small businesses should be watching for in their marketing strategy?
So here's the thing. Audio is growing year on year. Edison Research does a study every year called the Share of Ear Report, and it is showing that audio content is growing, and the rate of growth of podcasts in particular across all demographics continues to rise. So I think it is really worth serious consideration to look into this, do a little research, and see if a podcast is worth it for your business. It's not going to be for everybody. I'm not saying everybody should have a podcast, but it's worth considering. It's worth looking into.
Well, as we're wrapping up here, we're going to do a couple of just rapid fire questions, and these should be pretty quick. So, JD, what is the worst advice you've ever gotten in relation to what we've talked about?
I think I've been rather fortunate. I can't think of any glaringly bad advice that I've received, but I will answer your question, and just because I don't want to leave you hanging, so I will say here's one of the best things that I ever received, and that was with a manager of mine several years ago. First big corporate job in my early 20s, and was working on a task. The boss's boss came up and asked me what I was doing, explained, why are you doing it that way? Well, that's just the way we've done it. That's what I was taught. And he told me, just because that's the way it's always been done doesn't mean you should continue doing it that way, or that it's the best or the most efficient way of doing things. And he taught me something that day that I have never forgotten. And I worked with him. He came, that to his credit, he came alongside me, helped me develop a new system for doing that particular task. And not only did he help me with that, but he taught me a lesson that I've never forgotten.
So it wasn't the worst
I switched the question
advice
around for you.
Yeah, so it wasn't the worst advice. Could have been the best advice you ever got. So that's pretty awesome. Good way to do it. That's awesome.
Yep. And so what's a common myth about working as a voiceover artist or as a podcaster? Could be either.
Well, for both, let's do both. So one thing that I hear a lot is people saying, well, people tell me that I have a good voice, so I can be a voice actor. Well, yes, you do want to have a pleasant sounding voice, but that also doesn't mean that it has to be the big booming announcer voice either. I don't have a spectacularly sounding voice. I'm not the movie trailer voice of God kind of voiceover artist, but there are jobs for any kind of voice. But the key is it's called voice acting. You have to be able to act. You have to be able to deliver the message. And so just because you have a pleasant sounding voice, that's not enough. You have to be able to act. So you have to get some training. You got to go through some coaching, learn the craft, just like any other industry. And in terms of podcasting, a common myth or misconception is that people think that every podcast needs to be an interview format. It doesn't. You can do anything you want to. The sky's the limit, really. So don't get locked into a particular format idea.
So do you have a favorite podcast that you're currently listening to?
Oh,
man, I love talking about this because I love podcasting. And so one that I'm really, really enjoying, and I've been listening to the show for quite a long time, but it's called Under the Influence. It's hosted by Terry O'Reilly. and it's a show that I think probably your audience might want to check out. It's all about advertising and branding and the stories behind different ad campaigns. Terry is an ad man, and so he knows the industry inside and out. It's from the CBC, or actually, I think they've gone off into their own now, but it used to be part of the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company or Corporation. Anyway, great show, great show. And if you're a word nerd like me, another show that I've really been enjoying lately is called Words Unraveled, hosted by Rob Watts and Jess Safaris. It's a show about words, language, and etymologies, and I just find that kind of stuff really interesting.
I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, definitely. I think our audience would be interested in that for sure.
Absolutely.
Yep. So what's something new that you've learned recently?
Well, this is probably not new to most people, and I suppose that somewhere in the back of my mind I already knew this, but I've recently been reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and I'm really, really appreciating many of the thoughts that he shares in that work. And one of the biggest things that stood out to me, I'm only about halfway through it right now, but the lesson that I'm coming away with is people are people, always have been, always will be, across cultures, continents, and centuries. People are people. And so learning to have grace and understanding as much as possible in all your interactions with people is going to help you go a long way. And so that's something that I've really been trying to think about as I'm going through this book. And I think it's something that is definitely worth listening to. And so that's one thing that is part of who I try to be, is always learning, always improving. And so it's just something that I've really been enjoying.
Yeah, awesome. And if listeners took away one thing from this interview, what would that be?
Marketing is storytelling, and doing it well is vital to your business's growth. So being willing to try new methods and see if they work for you is great, but do it to the best of your ability. Look at all the tools available to you and make a decision and have fun with it.
That's the best part right there, is have fun with it, and don't take it all. I mean, take it seriously, but don't take it too seriously where you're not going to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Take the content seriously. Don't take yourself too seriously.
That is great advice, and that is an excellent way to wrap this up. JD, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this. These are great topics. Our listeners are really going to love it, and they're going to take something away, and I really appreciate your time here today, JD. That's awesome.
Oh, it's been a blast. I love talking about this, so thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, man.
Yep.
All right, what'd you learn?
I learned to value your listeners' time. And to make sure that your content is going to be valuable to them.
Yeah. And I one of the things that I learned from that was also planning it out, because that goes into working with the people's time, and in making sure that you're using it wisely, and editing, like what he said about editing, when people don't edit their podcast. I mean, think about, I've never heard one where people just kind of go out and haphazard leave stuff in there. But
I've heard it before.
Oh, have you?
Yeah. He said, people. It was like, oh well, we'll edit that out later. I've heard that. Yeah.
Oh, I've never heard that, but that's interesting that you've heard that. But the other thing is that anybody can really podcast, and that anybody's information is valuable to their audience. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an hour or a half hour or 15 minutes, but whatever the right amount of time is for people to get the information that they need to get, that is valuable to them, that will add value to the relationship with you, is vital to, and don't be afraid to do it. And I think that's the other thing is, I think that what he said, is don't be afraid and don't do it cheaply, because like you just said right there, people say, well, we'll edit that in post. That reflects back on, that does reflect back on your brand.
Yep. And about having good audio. I mean, as a video guy, I know how important that is. So
you talk about that.
You need good audio. If you have bad audio, nobody's going to listen.
We've redone things numerous times because audio wasn't right. So that's a really interesting. Yeah, you're right. You do need good audio, but it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to get started.
It doesn't. It just, you just have to know maybe a little bit of what you're doing
and do a little homework and not
side.
just jump in without doing some research on it. That was the other thing, because you see so many people that just go out and say, I'm going to do this, and they spend all this money, they don't know how to do it right, and then they make themselves look poor. And it does reflect on the brand. But he's also said that the consistency was also an interesting
and
point.
Just, I mean, in a way, you really don't know till you start.
Yeah.
So there's that side of it too.
And feedback. Feedback and getting that, so you know whether what you're doing is right, what you're doing is wrong, and asking people how to give you the straight answers. There's a lot that was in that. Unpacking all of it right now, I don't think we can do it in the 2 minutes we're sitting here.
Yeah.
But I mean, after I watch that again, later I'll pull more and more information out of there. He's really smart guy. Really smart guy. But thanks for watching and sticking around with us today to talk about podcasting and voiceovers. I'm Skip Ranke.
And I'm Nate Kuval.
And this is the Main Street Marketing Podcast. You can catch us on all of your channels, whether it's Apple, Spotify. Be sure to follow us. And you can also watch the video side of this on YouTube, which the address is YouTube/@Paragon Marketing Group. .com/podcast. We have them all listed there, and you can watch the episodes as well. So again, thanks for watching us today, and we'll see you next time.